Hello and welcome to World News on the Hour here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. U.S. President Donald Trump says an end to the war in Ukraine is closer than ever, following weekend talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky in Florida, where the leaders discussed the 20-point peace plan. In a joint press conference, Trump also addressed questions on Ukraine's reconstruction. We go now to Oz Chatterjee in Kiev. Oz, what's the reaction been to this meeting where you are?
Well, I mean, look, at the end of the day, while Donald Trump and President Zelensky put a positive spin on things, Donald Trump saying progress has been made, although thorny issues remain, it's still unclear what has actually been what there has actually been progress on. For example, the status of Donetsk and Luhansk. That's something that's still unclarified from this meeting. And we've heard from the Kremlin once again reiterating their demand that Ukraine withdraws from their own territory in full. This is something Ukraine has flat out refused to do, and something that is in discussion with the United States for proposals that would involve both sides withdrawing. And those proposals would have to be put to the Ukrainian people. So a very difficult situation to be negotiated, even if these sides were in more agreement, and they are not in more agreement. So while, there's been a lot taken away from this meeting, that it could have gone a lot worse considering how Trump and Zelensky meetings have gone in the past, it's unclear whether there's been any progress here. And I don't feel that the Ukrainians are thinking that this meeting has resulted in lots of progress being made on this deal. Now, another issue is one of Trump's comments made in the press conference last night has also caused some concern here in Ukraine. Let's take a listen to what Donald Trump had to say in that conference.
Russia wants to see Ukraine succeed. It sounds a little strange, but I was explaining to the president, President Putin was very generous in his feeling toward Ukraine succeeding, including supplying energy, electricity, and other things at very low prices. So a lot of good things came out of that call today. But they were in the works for 2 weeks with Steve and with Jared and Marco and everybody.
Did Russia agree, or did Putin agree to a ceasefire to allow a referendum to take place?
Not a ceasefire. And that's one of the points that we're working on right now. No, not a ceasefire. He feels that, look, they're fighting and to stop, and then if they have to start again, which is a possibility, he doesn't want to be in that position. I understand that position.
So, look, those comments clearly have not gone down well in Ukraine, because there are very few here who would see Putin as generous and wanting Ukraine to succeed. But look, this is the issue that Ukraine has to deal with. They have a president in the White House who is not as supportive explicitly as Biden was towards their cause. But overall, I think Ukrainians will look to that meeting and think it ended in a much more positive way than it could have done. The question will be how much will the policy from the United States change over the course of further rounds of negotiations with Russia? Frequently, Kiev has been in this position where discussions have been held between the White House and Russia, and suddenly the White House has a policy towards Ukraine that is a lot more hostile than it was looking back at the previous rounds of negotiations between Kiev and Washington. So a lot more still to be done. A lot still hasn't been agreed. It's unclear what's going to be agreed. But for now, these talks are at least ongoing, Ashim.
Thank you very much indeed for that update, Oz, and stay safe in Ukraine. European leaders have weighed in following the weekend meeting between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. The leaders emphasized the importance of security guarantees, and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the hour-long meeting made, quote, good progress, which we welcomed, sharing her comments on social media. We go now to our correspondent in Brussels, Alex Cadier, for the latest. Alex, what do you have for us?
Well, good afternoon, Ashim. These European leaders would have been watching very, very closely indeed. There would have been concern, as there so often is with a meeting between President Zelensky and President Trump, that there could be disagreements, there could be a public spat like we had seen back in February. For now, the meeting seemed relatively warm, and at least it didn't set the course of peace backwards, and that would have been a relief for European leaders. And as you rightly mentioned, Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, hailing progress in these talks. We heard similar messaging from Alexander Stubb, the Finnish president, from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, who said that he will host coalition of the willing countries, European countries, to talks in Paris to be able to further determine what contributions Europe could make. We also heard from the Polish president, Karol Nawrocki, saying that security guarantees, any peace deal, has to involve all interested parties, and that, of course, means Europe as well. We also heard from the Polish prime minister in the last few hours as well.
After overnight talks with European leaders, one thing is certain: the West and Ukraine will lose this confrontation if Russia manages to divide us and dictate the terms of the peace. The declaration of US involvement in security guarantees is a success, but the talks are still far from over.
Talks far from over then, Ashim, because so much of the devil is in the detail. And you heard that from Oskar in Kiev. As much as there has been progress hailed, exactly what that will mean in practice if a peace deal is reached is still to be determined. Now, clearly, Prime Minister Tusk highlighting that those security guarantee commitments from the United States are positive, but they, the European leaders, will need to understand exactly what that means, what that so-called US backstop means, because Donald Trump has said he wants European powers to take a very large share of any security guarantees going forward. But the reality is European militaries have certain things they simply cannot do without the United States. They will need weapons, they will need intelligence, they will need satellite surveillance, things the US can provide. Will the US provide them is the big question. Another final point, Ashim, that I think will be interesting to European leaders. Donald Trump was asked about those assets, Russian frozen assets held here in Belgium, as whether or not they will go to Ukraine, whether or not they will go to Russia, maybe they'll go elsewhere. He said none of that has been determined. That is unaligned with the European position. The European Union has permanently frozen those assets in the last few weeks and has said they will only be given back to Russia when Russia pays reparations to Ukraine. So again, a lot of the devil in the detail here, Ashim.
Indeed, the devil is in the detail. Alex, thank you very much for that update, and we look forward to hearing what happens next. Bye for now. We cannot be certain because we are dealing with Russia. That was President Volodymyr Zelensky's response to TVP World when asked whether a meeting with US President Donald Trump could guarantee the return of Ukrainian children abducted by Russia. Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz had this to say.
To be honest, we cannot be certain because we are dealing with Russia. This is the most difficult issue, and it is very important that our partners raise it. It is also very important that you, journalists, raise it, because if we don't talk about it, Russia will do everything to make this issue be forgotten.
That was clearly President Zelensky's response about the children. Voters in Kosovo's capital, Pristina, have returned to the polls in a renewed effort to break 10 months of political deadlock and form a stable government. Acting Prime Minister Albin Kurti's Vetev Endosie party emerged as a clear winner in Sunday's snap election, securing more than 49% of the vote.
He might not look it, but Albin Kurti, the leader of Vetev Endosie, Albanian for self-determination, is happy. His party secured more than 49% of votes in Sunday's snap general election.
Once the results will be certified by Central Election Commission, we should swiftly constitute a parliament out of 10th legislature and then form immediately new government.
Depending on the final vote count, which will take several days, Vetev Endosie will either be able to govern on its own or will need just a few MPs from the opposition to form a coalition government.
We don't have time to lose.
mostly because Kosovo has already lost almost a year. After the last elections in February, Kurti's left-wing Albanian nationalist Vetëvendosje party secured about 42% of the vote.
And was unable to form a government on its own, obviously, because it did not have an absolute majority, but also it turned out to be unable to find a coalition partner.
10 months of political turmoil followed. Kosovo was left
without institutions. The government was in a technical mandate.
Given the results of Sunday's ballot, the deadlock should be broken now. During these elections, the decisive votes for Kurti's Vetëvendosje were to come from the supporters of the country's president, Vjosa Osmani,
who, with her diplomatic successes and in support with a few other countries, mainly with Turkey, they secured recognition of 3 countries, recognition of Kosovo by 3 countries, that was Sudan, Syria and lately Bahamas.
Osmani's latest diplomatic efforts mean that Kosovo is currently recognized by 110 countries. This and her support for Kurti's government is a solid starting point for her potential re-election as president next year, provided of course that there are no more deadlocks. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Work is set to continue at the site of Poland's first nuclear power plant. The state-owned company overseeing the project has signed a new agreement with the U.S. consortium Westinghouse Bechtel, allowing preparatory drilling and engineering to move ahead. The deal is a temporary measure while negotiations continue on the final construction contract.
A cleared patch of forest in northern Poland, behind the makeshift fence, drilling. This is the site where Poland's first nuclear power station will be built, and there's going to be much more of the drilling, as the Polish company in charge of the project just signed a new contract with the American consortium responsible for the construction work.
There was an announcement from Polskie Elektrownie Jądrowe about prolonging of this EDA contract that is making the preparations possible in spite of not having the final contract signed between the sides.
The contract signed on Monday is called an EDA, or Engineering Development Agreement. It's a temporary contract allowing for some preparatory work to be done. But Westinghouse Bechtel, the American consortium behind the plant, would rather have a final deal called an EPC, short for Engineering, Procurement and Construction, in place. Dan Lipman, the head of Westinghouse Electric Systems division, told Polish media during Christmas that not having the EPC signed in the first half of 2026 risks delaying the project.
Poles are not ready to sign the final agreement, and the reason could be the escalation of expectations. Poles are expecting more and more Polish companies to be involved in this project.
In other words, the government in Warsaw wants as many components for the plant as possible to be made and designed in Poland. According to the official timetable, the EPC deal is to be signed in the first half of 2026. Lipman's interview may signal this date is now at risk. So the question is the construction of the plant itself in danger of delay?
So the delay is already included in a scheme of nuclear power plant construction, and it is making the part of concrete construction, which was aimed at 2026, moving further away to 2028.
If everything goes according to plan, the station should send electricity to the grid in 2038. Considering recent constructions of this kind throughout the world, the schedule is already an ambitious one.
So that brings us to the end of this news bulletin, but we will be back on the hour. So see you then. Bye-bye.